Hello there, FFTCG community. I'm Judge Jared, and we have a new set. We have a new set that has been released, Opus 29, also known as Blissful Eternity. It is out in the wild. You have cards in your hands at this point, hopefully. I guess actually some parts of Europe don't have it in their hands, so I'm sorry. But you are thinking about these cards, even if you don't have them in your hands yet. So, because we have a new set, that means it's time to do some fact checking. What is fact checking? Why are we doing it? Well, every set, Square Enix puts out, they update their FAQ listings on the official page there. So they have just an FAQ section, and it goes from most recent set to oldest. Now, the funny thing, of course, is that it's FAQ for frequently asked questions. But in reality, it doesn't really end up being frequently asked questions because they put this out right when the set releases. So unless they got a bunch of questions about something when it was spoiled earlier in spoiler season, there's nothing to frequently ask. So they call it FAQ, but it's really more of a here's the things they think we're going to screw up. So they give us some clarification. So we're going to go over those entries and do some fact checking here together. I am pleased to report that if you've watched other fact-checking videos of mine for the last few sets, normally there's around 40 entries on the FAQ section. But for this one, they have a very modest, very restrained 16 entries, which like shocked me. So there's only 16 cards to go over in this set. So maybe this won't quite go as long as the other ones. On the other hand, though, I feel like most of the ones that were cut that might have been included otherwise are those ones that are like them spending 15 entries explaining how when you do so works. So I don't know, maybe it won't be saved that much time. But most of the cards we have to talk about today are pretty interesting. As a reminder, before we get into it, I have kind of a 3-tiered system for how I approach these and kind of categorize them. You can see down below here some examples. So my 3-tiered system, if it's in green, basically that's a ruling that I think is pretty dang basic. And unless you started playing like last week, you probably know how this works already. So green ones are kind of I don't know why they included it. Like, it doesn't really need clarification, but sure. Yellow ones, I use yellow to signify when it's something that is not new or not super complicated, but it's enough of I don't want to call it niche ruling, but it's enough of a kind of deeper cut ruling that we either don't see it very often or people tend to get confused by it a lot. You see questions about this type of concept a lot, things like that. So yellow is kind of like hey, you should pay attention here because there's something that you might not understand or that you didn't realize you didn't understand or just need a refresher on, things like that. So yellow is kind of like, all right, time to lean forward in your chair a little bit. And let's make sure that we get what's going on here. And then red, I pretty much reserve red for one of two situations. Either if there's a brand new concept or a brand new wording or something that we've never seen before. So it's definitely like okay, we're in uncharted territory and they're giving us a little bit of a heads up on how some of this works. Or when something is just so dang complicated or worded poorly or both that it seems like, all right, this is, even if you know the rules pretty well, you might still not have realized this is how this goes, or you might miss a bit of a nuance in it. So red is the ones that I think are like, yeah, this definitely warranted talking about, even more so than the yellow ones there. So that's my 3-tier system for this. Nothing too serious, but if you want to kind of know what those colors mean. All that being said, I have rambled enough. Let's talk about some cards, huh? First up, we have Ultima Weapon Origin. And the entry here for Ultima Weapon Origin says, Ultima Weapon Origin is always counted as also being card name Astos. This applies whether it is in the break zone, deck, or a player hand. What they're referring to here is the first ability on Ultima Weapon Origin, which says Ultima Weapon Origin is also card name Astos in all situations. I'm going to pause for a second to point out the fact that I'm amused that it's not technically a typo, I guess, but card name Astos there, they forgot to capitalize the N in name. It should be a capital N there. So there's a couple of sprinkled typos in the set. I know people spotted that Jed says when he enters the filed not the field, but the filed. And Dion has some really interesting wording and stuff like that. Anyway, I don't want to get too far off topic. Here's the first card. So referring to that ability there, and it's not a new concept by any means. We've had a number of cards that do this, but it's something that I guess people could sometimes forget how it works or what have you. And so this is just saying that, most of the time with field abilities, they're only applied or referenced when the card is on the field, or sometimes when it's being cast. Here, though, we have the very special words "in all situations," and that's their way of saying that this game text is applied in any zone. In the same way that job is referenced in any zone, category, power, basically all the other printed stuff, like card type, all the other printed stuff that is not in the game text box, all that stuff applies all the time. And so this first ability is in that same category, or it's treated as if it's in that same category where it applies everywhere. So it's obviously it's card name Ultima Weapon Origin, but it's also treated as being card name Astos anywhere, not just when it's on the field, but when it's in your, as it says here, in your deck, your break zone, if it's removed from game, da da da. And why is that relevant for us? Well, it's important to know how the rule works in case we need to reference it. There have been times where they do this, and there's no other version of that card. I'm looking at you, Young Rahal and Young Exon Mill. Maybe we'll eventually get the regular versions of those. But why is it important here, specifically Ultima Weapon Origin? Because in the same set, we have an Astos. Now, he doesn't have a FAQ entry, but I just put him up here for reference, because if you look at his second auto ability, it says when Astos is put from the field into the break zone, you may search for one card named Astos, they did capitalize the N this time, and play it onto the field dull. So, as you can see, when this Astos is put in the break zone and his auto ability triggers, and when you go to search for a card named Astos and play it on the field dull, you can go search for that Ultimate Weapon Origin, because it is card name Astos even when it's in your deck. So, this particular ability and clarification can be pretty relevant, especially maybe in limited, I guess. They're both rares. So, that's the important thing to understand there about the in all situations stuff. The other time we see that is there's those forwards that say that they're a monster in all situations. So, in all situations means it counts everywhere. All right, next up, we've got Terra here, and her entry says, if you do not put a summon in the break zone by search, its subsequent auto ability will not trigger. What are they talking about? They're talking about her first auto ability. It says, when Terra enters the field, you may search for one summon and put it into the break zone. When you do so, choose up to 2 characters, dull them, and freeze them. This is actually one of those ones that they mostly cut out entries like this in the FAQs this time, but they left this one in, which basically just boils down to explaining how the when you do so works, and saying, oh, well, it says you may search, but if you didn't search, or if you searched but didn't, if you failed to find, then you didn't when you do so, as far as the game's concerned, and you don't get to do the trigger there. I guess because it's a search and searches can fail to find, there's that, well, did I actually search or not? Which we actually have a number of cards that trigger off of searches, like the LB Emperor and stuff, and those only trigger when you actually succeed in finding a card. So this is just kind of reiterating that, but it's not really particularly complicated. I think most people get how this card should work, so not much else to say there. All right, next up, Great Malboro. So first entry for it says, even if Great Malboro is not on the field when your opponent's turn ends, add the removed card to their hand. What we're referencing here is the auto ability, the second ability on the card, which says, when Great Malboro enters the field, your opponent reveals their hand. Select up to 2 cards in their hand. Your opponent removes them from the game. At the end of your opponent's turn, add them to their owner's hand. So they're just specifying here that this auto ability generates a delayed auto ability, which is where it says at the end of your opponent's turn, add them to their owner's hand. That's what they're referencing there, is that this is all independent of the Great Malboro. So even if it's removed before the end of the turn, that delayed auto ability has already been generated. It's already out there. So you can't get cheeky and be like, oh, I'm gonna use Witch of the Fens or something and get rid of my Great Malboro, and now you don't get your cards back. Like, no, you're still gonna get them. That's just kind of getting into how auto abilities work, and specifically ones that generate delayed auto abilities. But the second entry here is, I think, the more interesting one. It says, if adding the removed card brings your opponent's hand to 6 or more cards, they must discard cards until their hand is reduced to 5. Also, I should point out here that the translation quality on these FAQs has kind of gone down as time has gone on the last few sets. So some of these FAQs are kind of, they have questionable wording. So here both entries mentioned the removed card, but they're referring to the removed cards. It does say up to 2 cards, so technically they could have removed 1, but usually we're going to expect there to be 2, I think. So we're talking about the multiple cards, but if it brings your opponent's hand to 6 or more cards, they must discard cards until their hand is reduced to 5. And you might be wondering, why is that? This is happening at the end of the turn. How does this line up with the hand size stuff? So what's interesting here, it does say at the end of your opponent's turn, right? So I should take a step back and clarify here that you play this on your turn. You take the 2 cards that get removed from the game, and it's not at the end of your turn that the cards come back. It's at the end of your opponent's turn, right? So it's going to be through the rest of your turn and then all of their turn before they get those cards back. So this is why we're talking about the hand size stuff, is because they will return to their hand on their turn, not yours. If it was on your turn, they don't have a maximum hand size on your turn. But anyway, they would have to discard down to 5. And you might be like, do they have to? Like, when does that get checked? And I'm not going to go deep into it right now, but in the steps of the end phase, the section that checks whether you have more than 5 cards in your hand is later. It's a later step than the one where auto abilities trigger that say at the end of the turn. So that's why, is that all those abilities will have all resolved, and then we get to the step that checks hand size. And you probably see this coming, so we're talking about the end phase, but it's that time. That's right, it's shameless plug time, because if you want to understand more about the end phase, or you didn't know that already, or you forgot it, or whatever, I did a video all about the end phase and talking about all those different steps and when they come in, and there's even a little graphic and all that fun stuff. So shameless plug time. If you haven't watched that video, just like cue it up right after this one, or pause this and then go watch that and come back. Whatever you do, you. Whatever order you want to watch things in. Explains all about the end phase and how all that works. So there's your shameless plug, my shameless plug, our collective shameless plug. Next up, Ash. So the entry here says, even if you don't search for Job Monk, card name Monk, you can still play Job Monk, card name Monk from your hand to the field. Ash's ability reads as, when Ash enters the field, this is the second auto, by the way, when Ash enters the field, you may search for one Job Monk or card name Monk and add it to your hand. Then, if you control a category SOP FFO character other than Ash, you may play one Job Monk or card name Monk of cost 3 or less from your hand onto the field. So what they're telling you here is, even if you don't actually do the search, because it does say you may search, so whether you don't do the search or whether you do the search but fail to find, you still get to play a Monk onto the field in the second half of this ability, regardless. And you might be asking, hold up, why is this different than Terra? We just talked about Terra a few minutes ago, and she had a search followed by something else, and they said if you don't do the search part successfully, you don't get the second half. Why does Ash get it? Good question. The reason why is because his second half doesn't say when you do so or if you do so. Those things, of course, are going to make it, the rest of the ability, or the effect rather, contingent on having done the step before it, or the action before it, I should say. And here, they don't have when you do so. They don't have if you do so. It just says then. The example that comes to mind that's very similar to this is Sung, right? The Turks. So he's got that ability that you reveal the top 5 cards of your deck and you add a Turk to your hand, and then you can play one onto the field afterward. And his effect is also worded as then do da da da. So it's not contingent on having actually like added a Turk to your hand in the first half. And it's the same idea here. It's a search instead of reveal, but it's the same concept that because it says then, it's just this is one auto ability that has 2 different actions baked into it, and they are not dependent on each other. So yeah, it's treated differently than Terra because of the way that it's worded. So even if you fail to find for whatever reason, you can still play one if you have one in your hand already. Next up, we got our first challenge I want to talk about. I was gonna say our first big one, but that's a little too obvious of a pun even for me. But then I still said it. So Titan 16. We'll tackle these one at a time. So the first one says you cannot dull your backups to produce CP. What are they talking about? Well, they're talking about Titan's field ability. The first one on him here, it says during your turn, the backup's opponent controls cannot produce CP. And you might be thinking, wait, why does the FAQ say you cannot dull your backups to produce CP? The awkward thing here in their translation is that they are presenting this information as if you're the opponent of the person who played Titan, not as if you're the person who played Titan. So don't get confused. There wasn't a translation error on Titan. He doesn't prevent you from using your own backups to produce CP because that would suck. So yeah, the first one is just reiterating what his ability says. It says the backup's opponent controls cannot produce CP. So they're saying you can't dull your backups to produce CP if the opponent has Titan out. Okay, that's just another way of wording the same thing. We're basically on the same page, but it's a unique effect, right? We haven't seen that on a card before. Something that says, hey, your opponent can't dull their backups to produce CP, or actually can't produce CP from them in any means. So that's new. We're breaking new ground there. Second entry says you can dull your backups by action abilities and special abilities that include dull icon as a cost. So because this is a new concept, we haven't seen it before, it's not unreasonable to think that somebody might be like, okay, well, I can't dull them to produce CP, but what if they have an ability that includes dulling in the cost, right? What if it's one of the crystal producing backups, right? That you can dull it and pay 1 and break it to produce a crystal. Or what if it's Chocolate and you want to dull it to either draw a card or to add a counter to it? What if it's Lena and you want to use the raise special? Can you still do those things? Like, are your backups completely locked out, or are they just locked out from generating CP? And the answer is it's the latter one. They're only locked out from generating CP. You can still dull them for other means, right? But what you can't do is you can't dull them specifically to produce CP or do any other action of theirs that produces CP, which we're going to see in a second here, because the last entry specifically calls out that you cannot put Charlotta, they wrote as Charlotta, but you also cannot put Charlotta into the break zone to produce CP. I don't have her in front of me. Maybe I should have, but I don't. She's that Opus 8 wind backup that has the ability, they had to errata her, but has the ability that when you are generating CP or paying a CP cost rather, you can also put her into the break zone to generate a CP of any element. So they're just making sure to be clear here that this is not only from dulling your backups to produce CP, but they just across the board can't produce CP by any means. If there's a way either in the rules or by the effect of the card to produce CP, can't do it during the opponent's turn when their opponent has Titan on the field here. So yeah, just some clarifications there. And again, their wordings are not great because it's talking like as if you're the opponent of Titan, but hopefully you get the concept there. All right, Yoran-Oran, another red one. We're back-to-back red here. So we got another new concept. So the first entry is if the source of the ability is no longer on the field when the effect resolves, the last job it held is used. What are we talking about? Well, the field ability here on Yoran-Oran, it says auto abilities, action abilities, and special abilities of your job mage cannot be canceled. And that's a new concept. We have not seen before any effect that said something can't be canceled. So again, we are in new territory. We're seeing new interactions, trying to figure out how does this work. this is a perfect place for them to be doing an FAQ entry, because this is a card that like naturally invites a lot of questions about how it works. So they're pointing out here in this first entry, says if the source of the ability is no longer in the field and the effect resolves, the last job it held is used. What they're saying here is like, let's say that we had an auto ability that triggered from something that was a mage, and before that thing is resolved, the source of the ability has was left the field. Let's say it's just off the field now. But maybe it's not something that's normally a mage, right? Maybe we had, I don't know, what's a funny one? Maybe we had Barrett on the field and we used Nio and we gave him job mage for reasons. And then an auto ability triggered from him while he was job mage. Before it resolves, something blows him up or causes him to leave the field, whatever. Come up with your own story there. And he's off the field. His ability is still on the stack. And so the question is, can it be canceled, right? Because he's off the field. He's no longer a job mage. Can we cancel this auto now? And they're clarifying here that the last job that it held is used. So they're saying that because Barrett, before he left, was a mage, that it still can't be canceled, right? So you can't kind of sneakily get around it by going, well, you're not a mage anymore because you're gone. You've got 86th. So that's what they're saying there. To be honest, it does, for me at least, invite the question of like, how do I put this? Invites the question of like, does it? I feel like it's more than just a situation where he leaves the field. Like if he somehow lost his job before it resolved, like that's something I should tweet at them. I can't think of a great situation, because I think the only ones that cause you to lose jobs are ones that are on attack, so it's kind of hard to have an auto there. But I don't know, I'll think on it. But I'm not sure that the way that they put this, where it just has to do with it leaving the field and the last job it held, I feel like if it triggered while it had that job, it feels like that should be how it is. But I don't know, it's a new ability, so I could be completely wrong on that. I'm just speculating at that point. But what they are clear about is, in that situation, as I described with Barrett, he left the field. We're counting him as a mage, even though he's no longer a mage now that he left. Still can't be canceled. Second half of this says, even if you use something like Amaterasu or an auto ability that that cannot be canceled, it still deals 8,000 damage to the triggering forward. What? Well, what they're saying here is, just because an ability can't be canceled doesn't mean you can't target it with something that cancels abilities. A great kind of comparison to this is if you have a forward that has an effect on it that says can't be broken, you can still cast Odin on it that would break it, because Odin doesn't say choose one forward that can be broken. It just says choose one forward. So the target is still valid, even though the effect isn't going to do anything to him. And that's the same idea here. They're saying that, sure, this auto ability, let's say Yoran-Oran's own auto ability, the one that comes right after the one we're talking about here, that's on the stack. Actually, it's not a good example because he's not a forward. Let's say that we search out Shantoto, we play Shantoto to the field. It has some sort of auto ability when it enters the field. So at this point, can you cast Amaterasu on Shantoto's auto ability? Yes, you can, because it just says choose one auto ability. And so it's a valid target. Then when you go to resolve it, it doesn't cancel it because it can't, because of Yoran-Oran's ability. And so naturally the question is, well, it didn't cancel it. Did we still deal it 8,000 damage? And what they're telling us here, they're clarifying, is yes, it does still deal the 8,000 damage, because kind of like the Ash situation that I described a little bit ago, those are two actions that are not dependent on each other. Canceling the auto and dealing 8,000 damage are not, they're packaged together, but they're not dependent on one another. So it doesn't say, if it got canceled, deal it 8,000 damage. So you can still use this as a way, or you can still use something like Amaterasu as a way to deal it 8,000 damage. Similarly, you could choose it with Ject block and then just nothing happens because it doesn't get canceled. You don't get 8,000 damage there, so can't think of a great reason you would do that, but yeah, that's how that works. Next up, we got Roche. If either Roche or the chosen forward is no longer on the field when resolving an auto ability, the remaining forward takes no damage. So Roche has a pretty standard ability here. We've seen it a lot at this point. It says when Roche attacks, choose one forward opponent controls. Roche and the chosen forward deal damage equal to their respective power to the other. So even though we've seen this a lot, this is one of those questions that gets asked pretty frequently. Both like how it works and then also what the source of it is. It's a constant question and source of confusion for people, because this type of effect, it doesn't have an official name. In Magic, apparently it's called like fight effects or something like that. There's no official term for it here. I've before spoken about how I personally refer to it as like a command damage or a command effect or something like that, because what the effect is doing is commanding the forward or forwards to deal damage directly. So the effect itself is not the source of it, but the effect is basically instructing the chosen forward or forwards to deal damage. Again, that's just what I call it. I hate I hate when people use unofficial terminology, so I'm not saying to start calling it that, but if it helps you to remember how it functions, then, take it or leave it. So yeah, what they're saying here is that when this ability resolves, if either of the forwards are not on the field, there's no damage dealt. And the reason why is because, again, this is different than most abilities. Most abilities, once they're on the stack, especially if they're dealing damage, they're independent of their source, right? So they will still deal the damage even if the source goes away. Because conceptually, you can think of it as like the attack was launched, it just hasn't landed yet. But in the case of an effect like this is not an attack that was launched and hasn't landed yet. This is like sending out a carrier pigeon and then when the carrier pigeon arrives, the message tells them to attack each other. And so if one of them is already gone before the carrier pigeon arrives, then they see the instruction and they're like, well, I can't attack them because they're gone, right? So there wasn't actually an attack already in progress, but to have to fulfill here. So that's how that works there. And again, it's not new, but people do get confused by it. And you can tell that this is that type of effect because it says that it names the forwards that were chosen, or in this case, the one that itself, so Roche, and it says they deal damage equal to their respective power to the other. So it's written as telling you that they are doing it, right? So Roche deals damage equal to his respective power to the other. The chosen forward deals damage equal to its respective power to the other, being Roche. So the way that it's phrased, it's like them telling you what's happening, if that makes any sense, for trying to understand when this type of effect is what it is. All right, next up, Chaos. All right, here the entry says you may choose either option, even if you control one or fewer forwards or have two or fewer cards in your hand. In that case, you will carry out the chosen action to the extent possible. This is one of those cards that if you just glance over it and read it quickly, it looks stupidly powerful, right? The effect says when Chaos enters the field, your opponent selects one of the two following actions. The actions are your opponent selects up to two forwards they control, select as many as possible, put them into the break zone, or your opponent discards 3 cards. You might think, wow, either having them select 2 forwards and put them into the break zone or discarding 3 cards is super powerful for a backup that costs 5. Like, that's a lot of value right there. However, of course, the issue here is that it's not you selecting which one of them happens. It says your opponent selects which action happens. And so that naturally leads to the question of, can they select an option which they can't fulfill? Let's say they have no cards in their hand. Can they still select your opponent discards 3 cards? Because that makes this card a lot less effective, right? And the answer is yes. So that's what they're telling us here in this entry, is that they can, I hate that they wrote that you can choose either option because it's actually select, but you can select either option regardless of what you control or don't control, or how many cards you have in your hand or don't. So if you have 0 cards in your hand and your opponent plays Chaos, yeah, you can select to make you discard 3, and then you just kind of laugh a little bit. Or if you have a giant grip of cards in your hand and they play it, and you have 0 forwards, you can select the first option, and then nothing goes to the break zone, and you just laugh with all the cards in your hand. So yeah, it's a question that comes up often when they have like your opponent selects and then these options came up with the Dark Arden. Well, I shouldn't say that. There's more than one now. 5 CP Dark Arden comes up with him all the time, and it's the same concept here with Chaos. So yeah, you're not required to pick one that's going to punish you, so to speak. You can pick either one, and if it doesn't punish you at all, then yeah, select that. Okay, Shadow. So, first entry on Shadow says you can use a character's abilities even when you cannot cast cards. Why are we talking about not being able to cast cards? Well, because Shadow's auto ability, this is a long one, says at the beginning of main phase 1, during each of your turns, you may remove 2 warp counters from Shadow. If you do so, you cannot cast any cards during this turn, and you skip attack phase in this turn. I think they left out a word in that wording. Should we skip the attack phase? The attack phase. This effect will trigger only if Shadow is removed from the game and if a warp counter is placed on Shadow. So we don't have very many effects in this game that make it so that you are barred from casting cards. We did get one. I want to say it was last set or the one before it. We had the Dark Vein that restricts it so that either player can only cast up to 2 cards per turn. There's also the Light Ace. Oh, there's 2 Light Aces. The 4 CP Light Ace in the white jacket outfit that I think also similarly limits just the controller of him to casting 2 cards per turn. But we've never had an effect that just says you can't cast any cards. So even in this subcategory, it's new, but we don't even have a whole lot of cards that do this sort of thing. So again, it's pretty novel, or mostly novel, and so their first entry just points out, hey, you can still use character abilities, right? Even though it says you can't cast any cards, remember, abilities are not casting. So yeah, knock yourself out if you do this process where you removed 2 warp counters from Shadow and then followed through with this. It's got the if you do so. So yeah, so then you can't cast any cards, but you can still use abilities. Just that's fine. The second entry says you cannot cast cards even if the ability has an effect that allows you to cast cards. This is a little bit more important, I think, out of these 2 entries, because this is just specifying that there are some effects in the game that cause you to cast, even though it's on an ability typically. This is most common with effects that have you cast a summon, because summons in the rules are always cast, no matter if it's via an effect or because you're casting from your hand. So things like the Agito Maragito backup casts one. The Ice Dark Fina casts a summon when that auto resolves. The Limit Break Dark Fina also casts one, I believe. I think Echo, the Limit Break Echo, I want to say that one also casts a summon. But there's also a couple things that can cast other cards. Actually, it's just one. But the Water 1 CP Leo, the Roulette Leo, as I think people like to call him, his effect does say in part of it that, after you reveal the top 5 cards, that you cast it, right? So what they're saying with this entry is that you can't sneak around, cheat around this not being able to cast by having an effect that allows you to cast. If you were, for example, to play that Leo, actually, the Leo's not a great example because I think his effect only happens if you cast him anyway. So there's multiple layers of not being able to take advantage of that Leo. But let's go back to, I don't know, Dark Fina, either one of them. You play Dark Fina to the field. Her auto ability triggers. When it goes to resolve, it says cast a summon. And you're like, cool, I got a summon to cast. But the rules say you can't. So even though the effect would normally do so, you're prevented from actually doing that because you have this other ongoing effect that says you can't cast cards this turn. So yeah, no getting cute with Shadow's effect here. If you decided to go that route, you are committing yourself to not casting any cards there. It's not written here, but I guess since we're talking about it, I will specify, because Eureka asked it on Twitter just to make sure, that there's no problem if you've already cast a card this turn before doing the effect. So, this goes on to the stack at the beginning of main phase 1. Technically, before it resolves, you could cast another card and have that resolve and then get down to Shadow. And in that scenario, it's fine. It doesn't do anything to the card you already cast because that already resolved anyway. But also you're still allowed to do the effect that makes so you can't cast any cards. You didn't like eliminate your possibility because you've already cast one. Like the game doesn't care. So, all right, moving along. Soldier FFTS. Says here the value used to calculate damage is based on the soldier FFTS's power immediately before leaving the field. So soldier here says when soldier is put from the field into the breakdown, choose one forward opponent controls, deal it damage equal to soldier's power. All right, and you're letting us know that the amount of damage dealt is going to look at what soldier's power was before leaving the field, because this is a pretty obvious scenario, I would hope, but since this auto triggers from being put into the break zone, by the time this auto resolves, soldier is already in the break zone. So letting us know that when we figure out how much damage to deal, that we're going to look at what his power was like right before he left. Because he's 7,000 power printed, right? So it's easy for somebody to come to the conclusion of, oh, he's going to deal 7,000 damage because he's got 7,000 power. But this is a concept that we have that's called last known information. And so last known information is that sometimes when something does get referenced like this, it's looking at like the snapshot in time of right before it left the field. What was it at that moment? And we're going to reference that later, right? Our last known information, like it's kind of like, what was he like in the last moment we saw him before he went blip out of existence, right? Or she, actually, now that I think about it, I've been saying he a whole bunch, but there's some nails on that soldier. So I'm going to go with they. Let's go with they. And if I misgendered the soldier, then my apologies. I wasn't even looking that closely at the art until just this moment. So they will deal damage equal to whatever their power was when they left the field, which is relevant because there's a damage 3 ability that says soldier gains plus 1,000 power, right? So if we were at damage 3 when soldier went into the break zone, then they were at least at 8,000 power. And that means dealing 8,000 damage when we resolve this auto ability. Now, it would be understandable if you read through this, listened through this, and went, hold on, why is this different than Roche? Why are it left the field? Why are we referencing what it had before it left the field instead of Roche, where it said if one of them was gone, nothing happens, no damage is dealt? And well, there's a couple reasons. One is that if soldier worked the way that Roche did, its auto ability would never work because it only triggers after it's left the field, right? So it would never actually do anything. But the more serious answer is, again, the wording here, and I talked about it a bit on the Roche, but here, the way it's worded, it says deal it damage equal to soldier's power. So the way that the verbiage used here, verbiage, whichever one of those is grammatically correct, is it's written in a way as if it's telling you to do it, right? It says deal it damage equal to soldier's power, as opposed to Roche, where the wording was they deal their respective damage to each other, right? So that one was like describing something, where it's describing, hey, they deal damage to each other. Here, this is like a directive where it says deal it damage, like it's like telling you deal it damage equal to soldier's power. When it's this wording, then it's dealt regardless of whether the character is on the field when it resolves, right? This is that concept of having an attack that's already been launched, and then we're just going to see how much damage it deals when it arrives, as opposed to my carrier pigeon example for the Roche thing. So yes, this is a perfect kind of counterpoint, or the second half of explaining the Roche situation. All right, Barnabas, you cannot remove category 16 cards from the game that were discarded when paying for CPs with cast. This might be the worst wording of any of these FAQs. Like, just that phrase there. Were discarded when paying for CPs with cast. Like, I think we all know what it means, but dang, that could have been worded better. What they're saying here is that Barnabas has this ability. It's a pretty long ability, actually, for being what it is. Before paying the cost to cast Barnabas, you can You can remove 3 Category 16 characters in your break zone from the game to reduce the cost required to cast Barnabas by 3. And they're specifying that you don't get to remove Category 16 cards that were discarded when paying for Barnabas. Why? Well, because the way this game is constructed, the way that the rules were constructed, the concept is that you reveal the card that you're playing, then we determine the cost, then we pay for it, right? And this will be forever my like hill to die on, is the fact that the vast majority of people who play this game do not pay for things correctly, or they don't do things in the right order, because you're supposed to be revealing, then paying, or in the case of ability, like action abilities and special abilities, you are like announcing that you're using the ability and putting it on the stack and then paying for it. And most of the time, does it make a difference? No, but there are some times like this where it's vitally important and people get confused by it because they're used to doing things backwards. They're used to the concept from other card games of, oh, produce the resource first and then spend it on something. But here, in this game, it's the opposite. It's like, it's like, oh man, I'm using so many metaphor things today, but this is like taking the item up to the register and going, I would like to buy this. And they go, cool, it's this much money. And you go, okay, I'm going to produce that much money for you right now, right? Instead of going to the register first, putting out money and going, I'm going to go grab something, right? So this is pointing out that because the payment happens after we've determined the cost, that you're not going to have the option of discarding a card and then going, oh, I'm going to remove that to reduce the cost. It doesn't work, because we're going to determine how much Barnabas costs before anything ever gets produced CP wise. So another example of don't try to get cute with this and like discard a card and then use that to remove and then go, oh, we only cost 2 now. Doesn't work. Does not work. It's my white whale right there. If I could get everybody to play correctly, that'd be my greatest achievement. All right, Setzer, we're back in the red. So Setzer's first entry says damage allocation is determined at the time the special ability is used. What? Okay, well, let's look at his special ability. It's called Dive Bomb, and it says choose any number of forwards. That's very broad possibilities. Choose any number of forwards. Deal them a total amount of damage equal to 1,000 multiplied by each card in your break zone. Split as you wish among the chosen forwards. Damage must be in increments of 1,000. Then remove all the cards in your break zone from the game. We've been seeing, I think, recently more of these cards that do put an amount of damage out and give you the option to split it. We saw it with Vivi and I feel like some other cards recently that I'm now blanking on. But the nice thing about these cards is that they help us to learn this concept. So it says damage allocation determined when the special ability is used. So the concept here is that you will, Setzer's on the field, and you'll say, okay, I'm using Dive Bomb. Dive Bomb goes on the stack. You choose whatever number of forwards you're going to choose. And then we're going to look at how much how many cards in your break zone, figure out what the total is, and then allocate that. And we're doing it now because it's one of the 4 things that happens when an effect is put on the stack. The 4 things that happen when an effect is put on the stack are selecting from multiple actions, choosing targets, like assigning different values to different targets, and oh no, I've forgotten the 4th one off the top of my head. Oh no, what was it? I think it's like deciding which targets are which in terms of if they're treated differently. There's a better way to word that I'm forgetting off the top of my head, but those are the only 4 things that happen when an effect is put on the stack. And this is number 3 on that list, which I did remember. So number 3 on the list was assigning values. So we don't wait until this resolves to go, okay, I'm putting this much here, this much here, and this much here. You have to, when it's going on the stack, you have to like announce that ahead of time, and you're locked in, which has pluses and minuses that we're going to come back to here. Because the second entry on this says cards discarded to pay the cost of the special ability are not counted toward damage allocation. Why? Well, this goes back to what I just discussed on the previous entry here. with Barnabas, which is that it's on the stack and we're going to do all of these steps before we pay the cost. So at the time that we're figuring out how many cards are in the break zone and thus how much damage we have to divide, we haven't yet paid for the ability, which this ability is, it's just an S cost, but still that Setzer that's in our hand, it's not in the break zone yet, so we're not going to count that towards it because we have to do those 4 steps that I was talking about before we even get to paying. That's part of the process of putting on the stack. And like I said, my white whale here, we're supposed to put the effect on the stack first, do everything that's in those 4 steps, and then pay for it. Okay. So yeah, you don't get to count anything you discarded for dive bomb as part of the amount of cards in your break zone. Then the last entry says, even if the number of cards in the break zone changes during the resolution of the special ability, the allocated damage remains unchanged. I mentioned before that you have to commit to the amount that you're dividing ahead of time and how there's pluses and minuses to that. This is the plus to that, right? The minus is that you have to announce ahead of time and you have to kind of commit. But the plus is that because it's something that was decided when it was put on the stack, it can't change at this point. So I feel like, I mean, I don't know if this card's going to see much play or if anybody's ever going to use Dive Bomb, but if it becomes used enough that this happens, I guarantee you what's going to happen at some point. Somebody's going to use Dive Bomb. It's going to be on the stack. They're going to have it like allocated out. This is how much is going everywhere. And somebody is going to respond, the opponent, with, I'm going to miss Dragon you. Haha, I removed your break zone from the game. Cool. Now there's 0 cards in your break zone. Now let's go ahead and resolve Dive Bomb. And they're going to be all smug and think that they just counterplayed. And then if somebody at the table knows the rules, they're going to go, okay, well, the damage still resolves. And they're going to be like, what? And that's because, again, that stuff was decided before and when it was put onto the stack, and it can't change. So yes, it was based on the amount of cards in your break zone, but just like how we said we don't get to add in whatever was used to pay the cost for it, like we don't get to apply that, works the other way too. If the break zone cards are gone now, doesn't matter. We've already locked in how much damage is going to be dealt to each of the targets. So that's why I've got this red here, is because there's a lot of nuance to the timing of this and how it works and how it resolves that I think people are not going to be particularly prepared for. So but again, I don't know how much this card is going to see play, but it's worth it to know these things, right? So even if it's not Setzer himself, but if something else has similar text, then understanding how that works is very important. Next up, Seer. If Seer is not on the field when the situation is resolved, use Seer's power immediately before it left the field. I'm laughing because I just remembered that I love the way that this is worded. When the situation is resolved is so funny because we're talking about the it's an action ability here. So I mean, they should have just written it as when the action ability is resolved, but it's the situation, right? So I feel like I want to use that from now on when we're talking about resolving things. Okay, well, so the situation was, or like, now the situation is resolved. Anyway, the action ability, what does it say? It says choose one forward opponent controls, deal it damage equal to Seer's power. If you discarded a summon to pay this ability's cost, deal it double the damage of the power of Seer instead. So yeah, so what happens is you use this and you deal normally 7,000 damage, but if you discard a summon, you're gonna double that to 14,000 damage. And they're pointing out, because it's based off of Seer's power, saying if Seer leaves the field, you're gonna reference the power immediately before it left the field. We just talked about this with Soldier just a few entries ago. Same concept. This is another one where the variable on the damage is based off of the forward's power, but the forward itself is not directly dealing damage like with an effect like Roche. This is just, we've launched an attack and it's got a variable to it. The variable is based off of the power of the source, and if the source leaves, the attack's already been launched, but we're just going to go, hey, what was the power we're going to fill in that variable based on the power at the last known moment before it blipped out of existence. And so, yeah, it's the same concept as soldier overall, is what they're just reminding us of here. Oh, Bahamut. So this card's a problem. This card is a problem. The entry says when 2 or more of your opponent's forward auto abilities trigger at the same time, your opponent can decide the order in which they trigger, allowing your opponent to choose which ability will be canceled. Let's talk about how this auto ability is worded. So it's the second auto ability on Bahamut. It says during each turn, when an auto ability triggers from your opponent's forward for the first time in that turn, cancel its effect. I'm going to read it one more time. During each turn, when an auto ability triggers from your opponent's forward for the first time in that turn, cancel its effect. I could talk a lot about this card, and I probably will at some point, but I'm going to try to stick to like the most important bits here. If you've been following, rules roundup, I guess would be where you'd see this mostly. If you've been following my rules roundup videos, you probably know by now, hopefully, if I'm doing my job, that there's a difference between when an auto ability triggers and when an auto ability is put on the stack. Those are 2 different events, right? An auto ability always triggers immediately when the trigger event happens, but it has to wait until a player gains priority in order for it to go onto the stack, right? So the way this is worded, we're talking about when an auto ability triggers. Not when it goes on the stack, we're talking about when it triggers. And the entry here tells us, because there's a natural question here, which is that there's plenty of situations where multiple triggers happen at the same time. One of those that's really obvious is Axstar, right? Axstar has 3 auto abilities that all trigger when he enters the field, right? So the question there would be, well, wait, we have 3 auto abilities that trigger at the same time. How do we decide which one's first that gets canceled by Bahamut? And it would be a natural assumption to be like, well, maybe just go in order, right? He's, just go in the printed order. We say the first one triggered, then the second one, and the third one. We haven't had anything in the rules that have said that before, but I wouldn't have been shocked if they went, okay, that's how we're going to resolve this. And that would have been fine, except that that's not always when we have simultaneous triggers from forwards. We could also have a situation where you have 2 different forwards that have auto abilities that trigger from the same thing, right? Let's say there's 2 forwards that each have a when this forward attacks auto ability, and then you party attack with them. Okay, well, they both just triggered their auto at the same time. What's our tiebreaker here of which one technically triggered first? And again, there's nothing in the rules that ever talks about this because it's never really been relevant what the order of things triggering is, because it doesn't really matter. So they're clarifying it here, and they're saying, oh, if they trigger at the same time, we're giving you the instruction now that the person whose triggers they are, whose autos they are, they can decide what order they triggered in. Okay. But this led to a bunch of questions on Twitter about this, about how that works and everything. So the reason I said this card's a problem is because the set just came out. It's just now legal for grade 2 events at the point that you're watching this. It's a problem to the extent that they issued an errata for it already. So the important thing is that all the printed versions of this at this point in time, they're all this wording, right? It looks just like this. What I read out loud, that's the wording on it, but it's already been errated, right? So naturally the question is, what was it errated to? Does it change anything? And the funny thing is, even though all the printed cards all look like that right there, they have given us the image already. So, et voila, there's the errata image. So what does it say now? It says, during each turn, when an auto ability triggered from your opponent's forward is put on the stack for the first time in that turn, cancel its effect. I'm going to read it again. During each turn, when an auto ability triggered from your opponent's forward is put on the stack for the first time in that turn, cancel its effect. So what did the errata do? The errata changed it so that instead of it being based off of when something triggered, Now, we're basing it off of when it was put onto the stack. Now we're in territory that is much more like embedded already in the rules, much more well known, which is that when a player has multiple auto abilities that are being put on the stack at the same time, then the player whose autos they get to decide what order they go on the stack in. How does this change things in a practical sense? Well, it does change how it functions because, and I'll give you an example of that. Priming, right, which is a perfect example right here with an icon. If we had, which one do I want to go with? If your opponent was playing the Dark Barnabas into Odin 16, right? In the priming process, before like the Odin 16 priming finished, Barnabas's auto would trigger from priming, and then after the priming finished, then Odin 16's auto would trigger. In that scenario, if we were basing it off of which one triggered first, well, what triggered first? Barnabas's auto triggered first, because in the priming process, it was an auto that happened in a different step of the priming process and has to happen before he primes into Odin. In this scenario, the new errata text, it's up to the person who primed into Odin which one they want to put on the stack first. So here, if they want to, they can put the Barnabas auto on first, and then that'll be the first one, which means Bahamut will cancel that. Or they could put the Odin one on first. Chances are they don't want to put the Odin one on first anyway, because that's a much better auto, but that's neither here nor there. That's getting into strategy, right? But conceptually, now they have a choice, right? So with the old wording, they didn't have a choice. With the new one, they do have a choice. So there is a functional difference in how this card works before versus now. And that also happens in other situations where you can have between one priority and the next, you can have multiple autos trigger at different points, but then they all have to go down the stack at the same time. So I am thankful for the errata because it does simplify things. It leans back on stuff that we already know, and it also just makes things cleaner. It does make it technically weaker, I guess, because the opponent gets more options than they did when it was just based off of triggering, but it's less of a headache. The only thing that sucks is that they didn't figure this out until after all the cards were printed. So just be aware if your opponent's playing Bahamut to make sure that we are resolving and handling this auto ability the way that it's been errated to, because that's immediate, right? It's the card's gonna it's that way now. So just be aware. More on this at some point in the future. All right, that leads us to Seymour. So Seymour, we went from very complicated red to now we're back to green. Just says you can also put Seymour himself in the break zone, which is another sentence that I just think out of context is pretty hilarious by itself. So Seymour's ability says, when Seymour enters the field, select one job summoner you control, put it into the break zone. When you do so, choose one dull forward opponent controls, break it. Your opponent discards one card. So they're just clarifying that, you know, who's a summoner? Seymour's a summoner. So if you cast Seymour and you don't control any other summoners, which by the way, just say job summoner, so you could even discard a summoner backup, to be honest. Or if you somehow made a monster or summoner, then you could do that too. But anyway, they're just saying, yeah, Seymour can discard himself. So if you didn't have any other summoners when this resolves, then Seymour just offs himself right away to get the effect. So, but I like the way it's worded because it's almost like it's a suggestion. Like if your opponent had multiple options and one of them was better, it's like you can just tell your opponent, you can also put Seymour himself in the break zone. I'm just saying. That's all there is to that. Last entry. We're at the end already. And, I'm just under an hour at this point, so this is definitely going to be much shorter than the previous ones of these. All right, here. Jack Garland is always counted as also being card name Garland. This applies whether he is in the LB deck. So Jack Garland, sorry, gotta be specific here. His first field ability says, Jack Garland is also card name Garland in all situations. And this brings us to a nice full circle moment here, right? Because the first card on the list today was Ultima Weapon Origin, and the entry was all about the fact that it has the same card name in different zones. And it's the same thing here with Jack Garland. And also that was an SOP FFO card. So I just, I love when there's like synergy with things. But it's kind of funny to me in the situation because like they have to do this because ever since they decided to make Jack Garland be card name Jack Garland instead of just making it be card name Garland, every single Jack Garland they've printed has to have this text on it to make sure that you can't have Garland and Jack Garland out at the same time. And also to make it so that they count as each other for searches and special abilities and stuff. But this entry is hilarious to me because unlike other situations with this is an LB card, and we don't currently have anything in the game that cares about having a different one in the LB deck. Like there's nothing that's going to be like, oh, play a Garland from your LB deck. So, I mean, it's good future proofing, I guess. We could have something that eventually cares about this, but it's just funny that they felt the need to do an FAQ entry on this. Like, I'm not sure what situation they were imagining where somebody was playing this wrong because it was in the LB deck, but I don't know. It is what it is. So we have kind of a little funny one to end on there. And that brings us to the end. We did it. We got through all the FAQs. We have checked the facts, just the facts. Yeah. So thanks for being with me through this. I hope that you learned something. There was a lot of really interesting concepts that we went over, as well as some, like I said, some new ground on some effects and abilities that we haven't seen before and just wordings we haven't seen before. But yeah, so that's all I have to say about that. I don't have the little socials stuff here, but you can find me on Facebook at Judge Jared. You can find me on Discord, where my username is Judge Jared. You can find me on Twitter, where I'm at Judge Jared FFTCG. And you can find me here on YouTube, where you're watching me, where my channel is at Judge Jared. You can like this video. I would like it if you like it. That'd be cool. You can subscribe, which would be even better, right? You can do it in either order. You can like and then subscribe, or you can subscribe and then like. I won't judge you. I won't know what order you did it in. Actually, I might know. They give us the notifications in order. But it's okay. I won't judge you. I know that I judge things. Ooh, I'm going off the rails here. Can you tell it's after midnight? Yeah, so you can like and subscribe and do all that, and keep up with all the other video stuff I'm doing. You can go watch any of the 31 episodes of Rules Roundup I've done so far. You can go watch the end phase video that I shamelessly plugged earlier. Anyway, that's all that. Enjoy the new set. Enjoy the new cards. I hope you have fun. Good luck with all your pulls. Good luck with those of you playing in events between now and the end of the season. And yeah, until next time, court is adjourned.